The following is a Shaw TV Public Affairs presentation. Constituency Report is produced as a public service by members of the BC Legislature through the facilities of Shaw TV.
Welcome to Constituency Report with Andrew Weaver from Oak Bay, Gordon Head. In this segment, we will review the legislative summer session and provide an update on the current fall session. In the second half of the program, we will bring in Rory Hills, a first-year University of Victoria student, who will talk with Andrew about youth engagement in politics. Andrew, there was a rare sitting in the legislature in July with only one bill brought forward for government to secure an investment decision from Petronas for an LNG plant near Prince Rupert. Can you tell us more about the bill and your thoughts about it?
Yeah, I was very troubled by this bill and in the end voted against it. This was a bill that was essentially brought in by a government that is being dictated to, frankly, as to what needs to be put on the table for a company to potentially, still has not happened, make a decision with respect to LNG investment. Now, throughout the last year, we've had a couple of pieces of legislation brought in. The first was the LNG Income Tax Act, a piece of legislation which I was a sole MLA to vote against, and then the LNG Income Tax Amendment Act, which was longer than the original act, again, made an act slightly less bad, but essentially a generational sellout, giving away a resource. And then comes the PDA agreement, this is Project Development Agreement Act, and in that, it took that to a whole new level. It bound future governments to tax and royalty rates for 25 years. It allowed the company to pull out with 90 days notice, but if the government were to withdraw after the company made a decision, there'd be punitive measures in place, and a number of other measures. So it was essentially a giveaway. And even now, as I've been saying for 3 years now, we still don't have a final investment decision. And the reason is, of course, is that the market is oversaturated with natural gas. We are but very small players on the international scene. Iran is now coming on stream with more and more of its natural gas because sanctions are being slowly removed. You know, it's folly, it's economic folly to think that we could base our economy on a resource that everyone else has as well. And frankly, we're seeing the government now backpedaling as fast as it can from its hyping of wealth and prosperity for all and in the years ahead from LNG. You know, we shouldn't have had to come back in the summer for a sitting. We wasted hundreds of thousands of taxpayer dollars. We're here in the legislature now in the fall sitting discussing absurdities like Red Tape Reduction Day, like the Miscellaneous Statutes Amendment Act introduced in the Ledge very recently. I call it the Spell Checker and Comma Act. It's you know, the irony of discussing things like red tape reduction while we're doing precisely adding this in the legislature in these acts is not lost on people. And so I you know, it's troubling. I think we have a government that's lost sense of direction in British Columbia.
Mm-hmm. And on the topic of housing affordability, we have a video clip here from Question Period where you ask the Minister of Finance about housing affordability in Vancouver and the potential for a real estate crash. Here's the clip.
Oak Bay, Gordon Head.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Earlier this year, Honourable Speaker, we learned that the US short sellers are betting on a Canadian housing crash, calling it an accident waiting to happen. One article quoted a high-profile US short seller who described the Vancouver housing market as a, quote, a mix of money laundering, low interest rates, and he went on, a house is something you live in, but in Vancouver, you guys are trading them like penny stocks on Howe Street. Honourable Speaker, government often points to global forces as the main reason we need to be so careful and deliberate with our economic management. And I'm left wondering, Honourable Speaker, where is the careful and deliberate action to ensure that Metro Vancouver's housing market doesn't become the next housing bubble? More and more British Columbians are taking on bigger and bigger mortgages as housing becomes less affordable. The economic consequences of a burst housing bubble would be profound. My question, Honourable Speaker, my question to the Minister of Finance is this. Can he provide this House with an update as to what actions, if any, his government are taking to ensure that Vancouver's housing bubble doesn't burst?
Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and to the member. The first thing I can do, perhaps surprisingly, is validate for him the interest, the curiosity, at times the fascination that Americans have for the Canadian real estate market, Canadian housing market, and that includes certainly the Vancouver market, and that comes up frequently in the discussions we have from them. I think it derives in large measure from their own experience and the trauma that they suffered after 2008, and I think further to that, it derives from the belief that if it happened there, it is destined and therefore must happen elsewhere. What I tell them is this, and I'll respond and I'll tell the member in the House what I say to them. They do have to understand that there are some fundamental differences. The levels of equity that are involved in home ownership in British Columbia are on average very, very different than American markets. The rate of default and arrears thus far is very small, and the general stability of our banking system is different. Now, I don't say that at all to diminish or dismiss the concern, but this has been a high-value real estate market for a long, long time. What the government is doing is examining measures that may encourage first-time home buyers to enter the market. We are as well, through BC Housing, working to gather more information and more data, and I'm alive to the private members bill that was tabled today. And we are also seeking to work with local governments to address issues around density that are a key part of the puzzle of addressing housing affordability.
Thank you, Minister.
And Andrew, it's not just Metro Vancouver, but other places in BC are increasingly becoming less affordable. Can you comment on the government's response and expand on this for us, please?
I was not very pleased with the response. I mean, certainly there was information there, but it didn't address the reality. Some of the statements made, for example, about our situation being different from the U.S., while true, doesn't mean that it cannot happen here. We know that we have a problem when the average person cannot buy a home. We know that we have a problem when the home ownership and even the rental market is growing and becoming more and more costly. One of the things I did, of course, was, as alluded to by the Minister, was bring in a private member's bill to actually provide information to government as to who's buying homes. It's remarkable that the government has no idea whether people are buying homes from Alberta, from Ontario, from the United States, from Europe, from Asia. No idea, because we used to have, as a matter of legislation, we used to have a requirement to put on the jurisdiction you actually live in when you purchase. So the government's operating in the void of any information. Therefore, it really doesn't have an idea what's causing the drive. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence about a speculative market in Vancouver. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence, it's not even anecdotal, but there's a lot of buildings that are bought and are never actually occupied. People are speculating in the Vancouver market. Speculation can lead to rapid price increases. They can also lead to rapid price drops. When the Minister talks about higher home equity in our homes here in Vancouver, say Victoria, that's true when a house is rising. The problem, of course, is when a house value starts to drop, then you get people who actually have negative equity in their home. The value of the mortgage is greater than the value of the property. That starts to send in a cascade. There's a very real concern here, and the government this is a role that government needs to play in terms of ensuring that the market remains stable. The government needs to put in place some form of information gathering process to determine where the purchasing is coming from. We might find that we have to follow the lead of other provinces, other jurisdictions, and to have differential property transfer tax, perhaps property taxes, which would change depending on whether you live in or the home is occupied or not. There's a number of policy avenues that the government can take, but certainly the first step is to actually get information as to who's buying from where.
So we're now into the fall session, and in the first week, you debated a motion the government called to support the Site C Dam project. Can you tell us the circumstances around that motion? And noting that the UBCM convention which you attended passed a resolution to halt the project, what are your thoughts?
Well, there's two things with the motion. It was a motion put forward by the Minister, Bill Bennett, the Energy Minister. I actually thought it was a fine motion to actually debate. The problem with it, of course, is we should have had the debate a year ago, prior to the government already saying it will move forward with Site C. So it was essentially a political gamespersonship. The government was trying to put the NDP in a corner, and but some of the discussions were quite fascinating to hear some of the language and some of the concerns. In the end, the vote was the NDP and I voted against Site C. Not everybody was present in the vote, but it was really. It was an odd. There was some very good discussions there, but a very odd timing. And I would like personally to see more of these debates of matters of public policy. That is why we're elected. We're elected to discuss the issues that affect British Columbians. Is Site C really cost effective? One of my arguments, the strongest argument I was making, is this is a government that actually tries to brand itself as fiscally prudent. I would argue it's fiscally irresponsible. Site C is not cost effective. The NEB review panel was essentially said there was a dereliction of duty, or at least the chair of it did, by the government in not exploring other options. We know that there are cheaper renewable options out there. We know that our existing dams could be used in a different way rather than always providing firm power. They could be used, for example, when the wind's not blowing. When the wind is blowing, you use wind power. So wind power is actually much cheaper than Site C Dam. It's distributed, it creates jobs in local communities, partnerships with First Nations. We have, for example, on Vancouver Island, 3 organizations, EDP Renewables, a multinational, came into agreement with Timber West, a forest company, and First Nations in the Tsook and up and down areas of Vancouver Island to partner to invest $1 billion in terms of wind farm capacity here today. Did they do that? No. They're walking. Why they're walking? Because government has sent a signal to the clean tech sector that really have no need for you, because all our power needs in the near future will be from Site C.
Mm-hmm. And to switch gears here, can you tell us about your trip to the Okanagan that you took this summer and the places that you visited in your role as an MLA?
Well, one of the things I said is I would seek leadership of the BC Green Party in a convention, which I believe they'll announce sometime soon. I'm guessing it'll be in February sometime, or maybe shortly thereafter. In order for me to feel that I am aware of the issues facing British Columbians across the province, I've been traveling a little bit over the last little while, most recently with the Okanagan, and there I visited, I visited obviously Vernon, Penticton, Kelowna. I met with mayors, I met with some small businesses, I met with wineries, and the purpose there was to get a sense of what's the economic driver of the region. Obviously, value-added agriculture, value-added forest products, tourism are key drivers. But and as a consequence of that, I wrote up a number of articles. In fact, I should have one up again later this week, where what I did is I tried to highlight the innovation in BC. Take one company, for example, Davison's Orchards. It's a family-run business where what they've done is provided not only tree fruit, but they have value added. They have a restaurant, they make jams, they have a bakery, they have tours, they have let kids area to play. So they have value added on terms of a traditional tree fruit orchard. Or another example was Structurelam, an amazing organization that takes British Columbia wood and creates replacements for steel and concrete in terms of their glulam and crosslam forest products. Beautiful architectural design buildings use these products in replacement of steel and concrete. And so I was trying to highlight some of the innovation there. Far too much negativity in politics. We hear about the bad things, we don't hear about the good things. And so I spent some time trying to learn about those good things and communicate them to others.
All right, well, thank you. And we'll take a short break now, and we will return with Constituency Report.
Welcome back to Constituency Report. I'm here now with Rory Hills. Rory is a recent graduate from Oak Bay High School. He's a constituent in Oak Bay Gordon Head and a UVic student. Welcome, Rory.
Thank you very much, Andrew. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. One of the things I'd like to talk to you about is youth engagement in our political systems. You know, between 30 and 40% of youth between the ages of 18 and 24 vote federally. The single biggest demographic voter in the last election was the non-voter. The non-voter won most ridings across our country. Many of those non-voters are youth. What is it, in your view, that youth, we need to do as politicians to inspire youth to get engaged? Is it reducing registration age for youth? Is it perhaps talking with youth at an earlier age? Give us some ideas.
I think that's a great place to start, is just lowering the registration age. Socials 11 in BC, it's all about Canada. It's about our democracy. You learn our institutions and you learn just how important it is to vote. I think a great culmination of that would be registering to vote, or perhaps we can even start the conversation about lowering the voter age itself. I think that once you register to vote, you're more likely to vote, and voting's a habit-forming thing. Once you start voting, you're going to continue voting likely for the rest of your life. That's
an interesting point, because a lot of students, and you're one, I mean, you're going to university in the same riding, of course, as you graduated. But have you met people at UVic from across British Columbia who are talking about, we have a federal election now, are talking about where they vote or register? Will they vote? Have you got some?
UVic has a great setup. People can register at the school, they can vote at the school. I had a friend who was really excited. He got to vote for the first time and he had his mail-in ballot. He took a selfie with it and he had a great time. So I think on that avenue, Elections Canada and UVic is doing a phenomenal job. But I think just in terms of getting youth out, the younger the better. Having politicians come into classrooms, I think that not only it helps them, helps get people out there, but I think it shows a lot for the politician doing that. I mean, these aren't people that are ever going to vote for them, but they care about the democracy itself and they're willing to engage people, even if it is 10 years down the road, they're going to actually be electing people.
Do you, when you went to school, elementary school, middle school, I guess they didn't have middle schools back then, but high school, did you ever have politicians come to your school?
Personally, no, but I know a lot of friends who did. I know it's a really exciting thing. I can say my girlfriend got really excited to go out to vote when she first had an MLA come in. That being said, though, the closest I ever got was in grade 8 when you came in. Yeah, I'm sure you don't.
That was on climate, though.
That's exactly it. You didn't come in as a politician. You came in as a scientist. Okay. It was, I think, before being an MLA was even a twinkle in your eye. But you came and talked about the issues. You came and talked about climate change. And for me, that's what got me into politics. It wasn't a party. It was an idea. It was in part your speech about climate change that got me interested in politics, and that's how I got engaged just generally.
Well, that's interesting, because obviously it's the reason why I got involved in this too was, I've spoken about climate change a lot of times to schools, and at the end of speaking I often talk about the importance of engaging youth and youth getting engaged in our democratic systems, because ultimately your generation has to live the consequences of the decisions being made by my generation. And your generation, with respect, is not participating in our democratic institutions to elect those people who perhaps have your best interest in mind. And I would say that, and people would cynically say there's no one to vote for. And you can only do that so many times before you actually have to take a look in the mirror and say, well, you know what, maybe I should step up. But do you see any change over time? As you've obviously become aware of the political institutions, but have you seen a change with the people around you? Do you find them today that they're engaged? I mean, we have a federal election now. Do your friends, do the people you know, your girlfriend's friends, are they talking about the election in a way about excitement to vote, or are they still feeling a bit unconcerned or not engaged?
Yes, the straight answer is yes. And I think part of that is a lot of my friends and who I hang out with, but they're engaged, they're volunteering, and they're excited to vote. It's an exciting thing to get to do that for the first time.
So this is your first vote coming up?
This is going to be my first vote, yeah.
Interesting. I won't ask you anything about this vote. You shouldn't tell anybody, but okay.
That being said, though, I think that what people are really excited about, it's really less about a political party. It's really less about voting to have someone win. It's that they're excited about issues. They're excited to finally have issues that they really care about. Things like homelessness, things like the environment, things like gay rights, things like having a job at the end of school and having an economy that's going to support that. They're really excited about issues like that and are really pumped to be finding, who's going to best support those ideas.
Do you see, we hear a lot about the importance of social media in engaging youth in policy issues in our democratic institutions. Sometimes I wonder whether that's just, the token, let's do social media, that's how we engage with youth. Do you find that as an effective tool for, say, politicians to try to engage youth, or do you have other ideas about ways that we can actually get a sense of what issues are facing the youth of today that will actually get us to get you excited about coming out, not you personally, obviously, you as a generation excited about coming out to polls? Are there other ways, or is social media a good way? What are your thoughts on that?
I think that social media, it's a tool, and it's an important tool, but at the end of the day, you can't overstate it. It's not going to be a fix-all. I think that one problem with it is that you tend to get people engaged that are already engaged, and there's a danger of getting an echo chamber. The only people following you are people that agree with you, and so suddenly you get all these tweets or messages back saying, oh, you're doing the best thing ever. And so there's a danger of it becoming an echo chamber. That being said, it's still a good avenue because you can get a one-on-one conversation going with an MLA, with an MP, with a PM even, that you aren't able to get face-to-face, not in the same way at least. But I don't think it's the be-all, end-all of getting the youth out to vote. I think that if you want to do it, there's two things that need to happen. The first one, it's not something you can do. It's got to be a bottom-up kind of change. And that's that youth, just in general, not voting has to be a shameful thing, because it should. Around the world, people are fighting and dying for this right. Mm-hmm. And we are living in a free society, and we're throwing it away. And that should be a shameful thing. And for me, it is.
What do you think? We just had a delegation from the Flemish Parliament visit the legislature, and in Belgium, there's a requirement to vote. You have to vote. Australia, you have to vote. What are your views on that? I don't actually know where I stand on that. I could argue it both sides, as anybody in debating could. Do you have any views on that? Do you think voting should be mandatory, or? I'm
in a similar vote to you. I think it's definitely a discussion we should be having, because when you have voter turnout this low, we should be having a lot of different discussions. I think it could be an effective tool, but I think it's also dangerous to have people voting just for the sake of voting, because voting is only half of it. The other half is getting educated and getting engaged beforehand.
Let's come back to that education, because one of the things you said early on here is the importance of youth engagement in schools. Socials 11, I think, was every student in BC must take Socials 11. You talk about Canada there. You bring having a registration at age 16 would tie in nicely with students taking it, and being able to discuss what this means. So that's about registration. What do you think about actually voting at a younger age too? We registering at 16 is one of the arguments that have been put out there. In fact, official opposition put out in the last election campaign, said they would reduce voter registration to 16. I was publicly supportive of that and remain so. But another question is, what about voting at 16? And why I say that is that a lot has changed over time, and some, including me, would argue that the youth of today have access to information and like never before, and are not uninformed. We allow people, once they hit the age of 18, to vote. We allow people with dementia and Alzheimer's to vote. I mean, as they should. But a 16-year-old who may be globally aware, has access to information like that, both on the internet, TV, newspaper, is not able to. Do you think we should actually move voter age? I'm not trying to set you up with a loaded question, but obviously I think that we should have the discussion. But what's your feeling about voting when you're younger?
First of all, I think it's absolutely a discussion we need to have. I think it's a really important one. It's one where you have arguments on both sides that seem very valid. You raise a good point. There's two people in Canada above the age of 18 who can't vote. And that's the head of Elections Canada and the deputy head of Elections Canada. Right. That's it. Everyone else, whether you're in jail, whether you have dementia, you can vote. So I think there's definitely a very good argument that can be made for lowering that voting age. And then again, you can have it in schools, and you can get that voting is habit forming. So when you get people voting in schools, they're going to continue voting for the rest of their life.
Well, it's exciting to think about this, and something I think we really should engage more. Do you find a lot of your friends are involved in political campaigns that are running in this federal election, or do you find, I know that Victoria is a bit of a special place, that there seems to be a lot of civic engagement. But people you've met at UVic, have you heard stories about other youth being involved in political campaigns, or is it really something that they feel uncomfortable with, or do they need information on how they could get involved?
Well, I know a lot of people are involved. Victoria is a kind of special case because you have two kind of very similar and very strong candidates that are both progressives. And so there's definitely a lot of people that think in a different environment they might be kind of more engaged, but given the one we have, kind of are stepping back. What I'd say though is even though there are some people engaged, there's a lot more people engaged on issues. Mm-hmm. There's people that are fighting for the environment. They're fighting to, again, end homelessness. They're fighting on issues that they care about. And I think that's the biggest thing that we could do to get young people out to vote, to get everybody out to vote, is to give them something to vote for. And I'm borrowing your words there, and I know, but the biggest thing you do is give them something to vote for. So you have to do two things. You have to bring those issues into the political sphere, because ending homelessness, dealing with the environment, creating a diversified economy, all these are political issues. But you have to do it carefully, because they shouldn't be politicized. Whether you're green or orange or red or blue or purple, everyone can agree that it's a terrible thing that we have people sleeping on the streets. Now, there might be a bit of a difference on how we tackle that, but that's something that it shouldn't be a political question, but it should be a question that we're asking our politicians. I
find that very refreshing, actually quite inspirational. And I say that sincerely. As you know, we haven't scripted this conversation, but I find the answer there about issues focused quite inspirational, particularly coming from a youth, because that is a belief that I have, is that we should be focusing on issues. Far too often in the legislature we have we talk about our differences, not about our similarities. So just to get a summary then, what if I were to give you three single issues that were important to you as a youth, not only you, but you as a collective in the riding of Oak Bay Gordon Head, from what you've seen, talked to your friends, what three issues would you think are critical issues for politicians to look at, to engage you on, so that we're actually thinking about your interests?
Now, I can only speak personally on this, and I'm speaking very much as a product of kind of where I grew up and where I'm living now. And I'd say the three biggest issues for me are, firstly, the environment. There's this false narrative that keeps coming up that you either have a strong economy or you protect the environment, and the truth is they're intrinsically linked. You can't have one without the other. And look at Newfoundland with their fishing stocks, right? You had such a focus on the economy that the environment pulled out the rug from underneath them. So first one is a sustainable environmental policy, an evidence-based policy. So things that actually work as opposed to things that sound good. Secondly is a diversified economy. We can't put all our eggs in one basket, and we need to kind of transition to a dynamic 21st century economy, because people aren't going to be working the same jobs for the rest of their life, and you need to be able to shift and you need to be able to change because the markets are always changing. And the third thing, again, this is very much a product of where I live, is homelessness. We live in one of the richest societies in the world. We live in one of the most privileged societies in the world, but there's still people who sleep on the streets. And I think that there needs to be something done. I think affordable housing, even housing first policy, needs to be implemented, because it's shameful that we're not doing something more.
Well, thank you, Roy. This has been an absolute pleasure for me, and thank you to those of you at home watching Constituency Report.